Access. And True Access is a community bridge building organization. We exist to serve others by helping them to build bridges, building bridges across all forms of differences, whether those be racial divides, generational divides, culture divides, relational divides of all kinds. And I'm excited to be sharing with you all today for our 5th annual Future of Black History program. And we're doing it virtual this year due to health and safety protocols. When we first started back in 2017, this was a live event hosted by our amazing friends from the town of Cary. So thank you to our friends at the town of Cary for continuing, even as we've gone virtual, continuing to be incredibly valued partners in hosting this event. And if there is any representatives from the town of Cary present, and I believe there are, please feel free to type your name in the chat. We're happy to bring you on. You have any words that you want to share. And so today for this year's Future of Black History program, the theme is accuracy, authenticity, and action. The importance of sharing and exchanging accurate information, particularly as it relates to our nation's history. Empowering and allowing each other to be our authentic selves as we are working together to create a nation that is inclusive and equitable for all. Not expecting any of us to conform to the ways that other people want us to be or think we should be. The greatest value, I believe, is through experiencing the diversity of people's identity diversity, their experiential diversity, and ultimately their cognitive diversity. Therein lies the value. So encouraging and empowering people to be their authentic selves. And then we can take action. Then it gets to the action, because as Dr. King taught us, that the change that we seek will not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. We need to do something to achieve the change that we seek. And change is needed, change is necessary. So as we talk about Black History Month, and we're going to focus on the future of Black history, because historically, when we talk about Black History Month, we look at and we focus on the Black icons of our past, as we should, because without them, none of us would have the opportunities that we have to do the things that we do. And so we want to make sure we continue to give them the respect and reverence that they deserve. But we also have to remember to give people their flowers. Those that are, as my good friend Houston White shared with me, living lives worth being documented today. People that are making history today. And the whole purpose behind Black History Month was to recognize and acknowledge the contributions of Blacks in America to American history. And so let's not wait until they're gone to say, oh yeah, they did do some good things. Let's recognize those contributions today. And that's what leads me to our guest keynote speaker for today. My brother, my friend, for those who don't know, I know a lot of people on here know Mr. Cunningham, know Greg Cunningham. What you may not know is I have been learning from this man for over 20 years. And I'm excited for everyone that's here today to get the benefit of his knowledge and experience, something that I've had the good fortune to experience for a long time. And I'm excited that you all get the opportunity to hear his wisdom as well. And so, Greg Cunningham, we want to make sure I know you're here to share with us and to impart some knowledge and wisdom with us today on the topic of the future of Black history. But I want to make sure we give you your flowers, brother, and say thank you and acknowledge you and recognize you. You've been an incredible source of inspiration for me over the years. I've told you that. And so I like to believe you know that and you believe that, but not just me, a lot of people in our space, a lot of people in our circle. And so thank you. Before we even get into it, I want to make sure I acknowledge and recognize you for that. And so I want to now just kind of give you the microphone for a brief introduction, and you can just tell the people a little bit about who you are.
Well, thank you, True, and good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to say Thank you to you and everybody at True Access. I want to say thank you to the town of Cary for sponsoring this. And I certainly want to thank everybody for getting up so early on a Saturday morning to hear what I have to say. That is truly humbling. And let me also just add, True, that iron sharpens iron. And so while you suggest that you may have been learning from me, I borrow from you and so many others on a daily basis. Before I introduce myself, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Happy Black History Month. And certainly want to dedicate my comments today to the memory of Amir Locke, the young Black man who was killed here in Minneapolis earlier this week. True, by day, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer of the fourth largest bank in the country, U.S. Bank. As you know and have stated in your brief introduction, have been doing the work that we can call it diversity, equity, and inclusion, but certainly not in the form that I think most people think of the work of DEI. I would say for the last 20 plus years, 25 plus years, I've dedicated my career to ensuring that the work that I did, whether I was a marketing leader at Target, whether I was an area director of the United Negro College Fund, whether I was a brand manager on Pillsbury's Biscuits, or whether I worked at a bank as a chief diversity officer, I've dedicated both my life and career to serving others, and in particularly serving underrepresented and marginalized communities. And what's important about this conversation, True, is, and I love the theme of accuracy, authenticity, and action, as a way of really having an honest conversation about Black history and Black History Month. And what I'm about to say may be surprising to some and maybe controversial to others, but honestly, every February, I'm extremely conflicted. I'm extremely conflicted about the notion of Black History Month, because it is oftentimes, what it does is it essentially whitewashes our contributions to the entire American fabric. And so while I celebrate, and I am just as proud, and I'm always so joyful when I see these celebratory moments that highlight African Americans throughout history. That's important to do. I'm not at all suggesting it's not important to do, but it's important to do it all year long. I was recently watching, and I don't watch a lot of TV, but I was watching something the other day, and they had this tribute to Althea Gibson, who many of us, know as sort of the tennis star, first Black woman to win a major tennis tournament. But many people don't know that Althea Gibson was also like the first Black woman to play on the professional golf tour. Like, she was also a professional golfer. And that was something I didn't know, right? So in that respect, I was like, wow, like that was really cool to understand that. But, we'll get into this, True, but my hope for, in the spirit of the theme that you've put together is, I would love to see February as an example, that should be a month where we just celebrate American history in a much more truthful and honest way. It should be a month where we sort of carve out time, whether it be in schools and business, to say this is about, because when I responded to your note on social media, and this is a theme that I carry for myself and a belief I carry very strongly, truth and reconciliation are sequential. You can't move forward into a more dynamic future until you have truly reconciled the truths of the past. It's not possible. It's not possible until you have an honest conversation about the history. Our country has a really bad habit of really like romanticizing our history in a way that is like, it's super nostalgic, and you know what I mean? It's like, we recall the good old days, and like the good old days for who? And so we have to have we have to have a much more honest lens on how we think about our history, and that's how we will move forward into a much more dynamic future. So that's what I would call my introduction, True. And I'm excited to get
Bro,
into it, man. Like, let's go.
so many nuggets, man. So many nuggets. Bro, you just put up 30 and they ain't even had to open the tip off yet. Come on, man.
Get into it. Man. I'm ready to get into it. It's important. It's an important conversation. And, because for so many of us, we were taught, and I'm borrowing from Baldwin right now, when we were taught history in school, I'll speak for myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I was taught history in school as a young child growing up, I was basically taught that I didn't have a history.
Right.
Like you were a slave, your people were slaves. Like that was what we were taught. And like, there was no history of Africa. Like Africa didn't, like your people were like, cannibals, and like the Europeans came and saved us and brought us to America. And like every book that we read, and the saddest part about all of that, True, is as a young person, and for many of us as Black Americans, the saddest part of all of that is not that that's what we were being fed. The saddest part about all of that is that we believed it.
We believed it. And you become what you believe.
And how could you not believe it when everything around you suggested that what they were saying was true? Every book that you read reinforced it. When you drove around your neighborhood and then you drove around a white neighborhood, you went, wow, like my neighborhood don't look like this. Mm-hmm. Maybe I am inferior. Maybe there is something wrong with us. And so like, that's the more sinister part of how our community was sort of impacted from the very beginning, and how we were taught, to see ourselves. And, the time has come for us to look, all of us, to look back at this history in a much more nuanced way.
Yeah, and I don't think as a society we understand the trauma that creates in young children. As we talk about adverse childhood experiences, I don't know that is ever included in the conversation of an adverse childhood experience. Is the way that we learn about our own history, about people that look like us, about not seeing people that look like us making major and valuable contributions to this nation, this country that we love. And also the conditioning of identity that comes with that. I don't think that part of the conversation is discussed enough. And the irony of that, Greg, is if we think about, and I feel you on the conflict during Black History Month, right? Because the founder, right, the godfather of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who created Black History Week back in 1926, created it for all the reasons that you just articulated. As a historian in this great nation, realizing that, wow, I don't see people that look like me in these. I'm a student of history. I'm a historian. I'm studying the history of this. I am fully aware of the contributions that Greg Cunningham is making. I'm fully aware of the contributions that Sherry Hunter is making. I'm fully aware of the contributions that Sharon Smith Akinsanya is making. I'm fully aware of the contributions that all of these amazing Black men and women are making, but they're not in these history books. So his thought was, maybe the writers of our history aren't aware of these contributions. And so it was always a desire for it to be seamlessly integrated as a part of American history, as a part of the story of America. So the conflict that you feel, I believe, is in line with Dr. Woodson's initial purpose for even creating Black History Week.
Man, let me share with you a really good example. I have a statuette in my office of my favorite American. Let me just put it out there. And I'll reserve the other part of what I was going to say. My favorite American is Frederick Douglass. And I recall, this was maybe a few years ago, one of my colleagues, happened to be white, walked into my office, and I had this statuette of Frederick Douglass, a small bust of his face. And he asked me who that was. And, for a minute I was puzzled, that you wouldn't know who Frederick Douglass is. But I said, it's Frederick Douglass. And what hurt me even more, True, was when he said, oh, I don't know who that is.
Wow. Who's that?
who is that?
Yeah.
And it sort of hit me at that moment. And I had just started doing the DEI work at this moment. And it frightened me because I realized how much work I had to do and like what I was up against.
You're like,
No,
wow, this is what I signed up for?
if you don't know who Frederick Douglass is, like if we didn't know who Benjamin Franklin was, we would have never made it past the first grade.
Right.
You would have never made it to second grade if you didn't know who Benjamin Franklin and the whole kite story and the whole thing. Like you knew the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And it was a powerful moment for me because it struck me at that moment. Because the realization is he didn't need to know who Frederick Douglass was in order to have success in his life. Like he didn't need to know who Frederick Douglass was. He didn't need to know who Madam C.J. Walker was. He don't need to know who Zora Neale Hurston was. He didn't need to know. Like that's the tragedy of it. And that's why I'm so conflicted about Black History Month, is because while we need to celebrate and bring awareness to these stories, we need to bring awareness of it in the context of Frederick Douglass is an American hero. He's not a Black American hero. He's an American hero. This man freed himself from slavery, taught himself to read, advised presidents, and became an ambassador from slavery. Who has traveled further than him in our history?
Right. And that is an amazing and an inspirational story of a great American.
My favorite American, arguably our greatest American. And I gave that a lot of thought before I said it too, by the way.
Yeah, and that has overcome, I mean, it's the American values that we celebrate, that we acknowledge, right? A willingness and the drive to be so resilient, to overcome the obstacles, to pursue and achieve dreams, but not only for yourself, but to create opportunities for others. I mean, like that's when you say it that way, right? That is someone that we all should aspire to
and celebrate. It's like
celebrate.
It's like Juneteenth, and finally we made Juneteenth a federal holiday last year. Juneteenth is not a Black holiday. Every American should celebrate Juneteenth.
Because that's when all Americans were freed and emancipated.
Quote unquote free.
Quote unquote, right, yeah, exactly.
Quote unquote free.
We still had those border states, Delaware, Maryland.
The struggle is still real. The struggle is still real. And you and I were talking about this before we came on this call. Because even though some of us individually have had some quote unquote success, and typically what that means and how we define success is some, personal financial success. And, we just did, and I was sharing this with you earlier, we just did a wealth study, Black wealth study at US Bank that we published back in September. And one of the most important insights in that study, true, was for Black consumers, even Black affluent consumers, they felt a disproportionate obligation to their community. And even though that they were having individual success, they still didn't feel like the racial wealth gap would be closed in 10 years.
Right.
So think about that. And those of us who are Black Americans understand that feeling. Even though you might have individual success, if those around you and the community you came from are still suffering, you don't really feel all that successful.
Yeah. Yeah, Tamika and I, that's my wife for those who don't know, Tamika and I talk about that often, Greg, right? We are so grateful, for the position that we're able to exist in life. We realize we're blessed in a lot of areas and a lot of dimensions of our lives. And I wouldn't say that it's guilt, and I don't know the exact word to use here, but we don't feel like we have any room to ever complain about anything. It's like, cool, we look at all that we have access to, all that we have. I mean, we're able to go on vacations wherever we want, whenever we want. We're able to go to whatever events we want. I mean, but then we look around and see and realize that there are so many people in our community, so many people that look like us, where that's not their reality. It's almost like, how can I just enjoy this with no regard for what's happening in our communities. It's almost like I couldn't, I want to do a real just kind of wellness check with you as well. But even coming into this session this morning, and this was already planned, we do this every year, I was like, I felt a little bit of guilt and discomfort because, man, my heart is aching for Amir Locke right now. It really, for our nation right now, for the Minneapolis community right now, because that this community is hurting. And when that happens, I feel obligated to do something. And so I don't know if that is something that you find yourself struggling with as well. And I believe you just said that it's kind of more common based on your study for Black people that at certain levels of accomplishment and achievement to feel that.
We all feel that. We all feel that when Amir Locke or Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, Amada, you go down the list, True, because what we understand as a community is not only are those people being affected, but that could be us. That could be our sons and daughters, and they are our sons and daughters, and those are our mothers and fathers. And there is no separation between us and our communities because we have such a shared experience as Black Americans in this country. That's the thing that binds us that is so unique, is we have a shared experience and a shared understanding that, the language that we, like, Black people can see each other on the street and just give each other a nod, and we know exactly what that means, right? Because we have a shared experience and our language is both spoken and unspoken. And, I fundamentally believe, True, and this goes back to your earlier point, that racial and economic justice are inseparable twins. You cannot separate those two things. There's no way to have racial justice without economic justice, and there's no way to have economic justice without racial justice. It's impossible. It's impossible to separate those two things, which is why my focus, when we talk about taking action, the focus that I really am sort of pointing my organization is on this racial wealth gap. And we've got to close racial wealth disparities. Not that it solves everything, but it actually goes a long way in helping create that opportunity that you're talking about. It gives people alternatives. It gives these young men and women alternatives to some of the choices that they make. And it's an American problem.
Right.
Wealth disparity in the country affect every American household, not just Black households. It's a drag on our economy as a whole. Anywhere from 4 to 6% in GDP growth suffers because of racial wealth disparities. Every American household is missing out on average $12,000 in household income per household, every American household. So we have a shared and an invested interest as Americans to want to see these disparities go away because we all suffer. And the only way that we can move together into a more dynamic future is to really have more honest conversations like this about where we've come from, what needs to change, and how do we move forward in a much more compassionate way.
Yeah. And that's where I would thank you for saying that, move forward together, right? As I hear you say that statement, those are the words that jump out to me. Move forward together. And we seem to have become so challenged with exactly how to do that. Is it a matter of just awareness and education? A lot of the things that you're sharing today, is it a matter of just helping everyone recognize that, hey, look, we're all on the same team. We want the same things. This is not a me versus you. This is an us thing. Is what are the obstacles to inclusion, if you will, obstacles to that togetherness that's preventing us from moving forward together so that the future of Black history is that seamlessly integrated shared American history that both you and Dr. Woodson envision?
It's truth. True. Sorry, not pun intended. But it's where I started. True. It's, you have to have truth before you can have reconciliation. We have to come to terms with the fact that, listen, Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, our founding document, classified you and me as 3/5 of a human being.
Yeah.
How do you move? How do
Yeah.
you, so what do you think is going to happen if you start by saying these people are 3/5 of a human being? And I understand it, because the only way you could treat people that way is to dehumanize them. There's no
Right.
way you can consider somebody your equal and create a system of barbarism like slavery and justify it. So on one hand, I understand it, but you have to sort of come to terms with these things and have conversations and be open-minded about, even if we disagree. It's not important that we always agree, but it is important that we listen with compassion and empathy and want to try to wrestle with some of these really difficult and ugly issues that are part of our past. And it's not about shaming and blaming anybody. It's about having honest conversations, because the only way that we will survive and the only way that we can live up to the promises of our country is if we do move together, move forward together. We have a shared humanity. We're shared in our citizenship as Americans. You know, when's the last time you've heard of a Black American being called a patriot? No, seriously.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
We're just as patriotic as everybody else. We love this country in a way that you cannot look at Black Americans and say they don't love this country after what we've been through, and still love this country. You know, we are the epitome of patriots. But it's not the terminology, it's not the label that's applied to people in our community. And so we have to have these honest conversations, and we've got to see the world through a much more inclusive lens, True. And I think this notion of love and compassion and empathy is the way forward. Meeting people where they are. As I said, it's not about shaming and blaming anybody. We're all at different starting points in this conversation. And I'm willing to meet where they are, because we have to move forward together.
Man, I love that. I love that. And I just want to let those that are listening, our participants, know that in the next 2 minutes, I'm going to start bringing people in for questions, and I will identify people by name. And if we're able to bring them on camera to the production team, to the tech team, I'd like to, as I identify someone by name, if we can allow them to come on camera to ask their question. Meeting people where they are. And I want to just take a moment to just place a small emphasis on that, because I think oftentimes when people say that or hear that, I want to remind them to take that literally. Because I think what happens is people meet people where they think they should be, or they meet people where they want them to be, and believe that they are exhibiting that level of compassion and empathy that you're talking about. But it is a very conscious decision, and it takes some courage, and you have to be very intentional to meet someone where they are, because you won't always like where they are.
Correct. Preach.
And so I just want to take a moment to really emphasize the importance of and the willingness to meet people where they are.
Back to my example about the guy in the Frederick Douglass statue. It would have been very easy for me to get angry and, you know, try to shame and blame this guy. How could you not know who Frederick Douglass is? This is what I'm talking about. This is why he did it. Like, it would have been very easy. And deep inside, that's how I wanted to react. Let me keep it 100 with you. Like that's how I wanted to react. But that's not how I reacted. My reaction was, oh, well, let me just, like, if you have a minute, let me just kind of explain to you who Frederick Douglass is, who he was, and what he means to me, and why he's my favorite American, and why I have a statue of him on my desk to this day. Like, that's meeting people where they are. It's not shaming and blaming somebody for not knowing. It's, oh, okay, I understand you don't know. Let me take a breath and like explain to you, because this is at the heart of what this work called diversity, equity, and inclusion is about. Like, we all learn every day. Swear to God, I learn something every single day. And I get more, honestly, True, from the people who disagree with me or fundamentally don't understand what I'm saying, those are the conversations I enjoy the most, because we all do in our space. Like, we get people who, you're ruining the company, you're doing like all of this stuff. But
Oh,
then I
yeah.
get people who just want to have a conversation because they're interested and they're curious. And I love those conversations because I learned something in those moments too. And I think it's important for all of us because inclusion means everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not about
No.
favor, it's about parity. It's about how do we make sure that everybody's voice is heard, even those that don't agree with me.
Right. No, I love the principle that you just shared about the importance of calling people in instead of calling them out, right?
Yeah.
Calling them into a conversation. And that
Yeah.
gives you the opportunity to, the next principle that I heard from you on that was recognizing that the solution to ignorance is education and not condemnation. Right.
No
I think we're
question.
too quick to want to condemn people based simply on their lack of knowledge or understanding.
Yes.
And there's nothing malicious about that. Now, we may be surprised and think they should know something or should be aware of something, but life isn't the way it should be. It's the way that it is. Right. And so the solution to ignorance should always be education. So no, thank you for not only for sharing those principles with us, GC, but living them out. Like you're living them. And I think that's, I think I heard it said once, well done is oftentimes better than well said.
No doubt. No doubt. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So I'm gonna, EJ, if we could bring the people that I identify, obviously one at a time. And I saw Guy with his hand raised. I don't know if Guy still has a question or if Guy is still with us, but I saw Guy Smith had his hand raised earlier, and then I'll go in order from the people that I saw from there. So if you have a question or that you want to ask Greg, please just type your name in the chat, raise your hand, and we will get to you. So I see Guy so it doesn't look like, I don't know if you're working on that, EJ, or not.
No, but the question was for you, Greg. Did your colleague know who Grant was?
I'm sure he did. I didn't ask that question. But Grant is another really interesting historical figure that is worth study. But I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure he did. What I think the reason I really like that question is I look at history, like one of my favorite periods in American history actually is the 19th century. Like, I love 19th century history because it was such a pivotal time for our country. Obviously, we were the Civil War and figures like Douglas and Lincoln and Reconstruction, and like there were so many incredible moments during that century that I'm just a fan of that time period. And so I'd love to at any time talk about the historical significance of that period. Reconstruction is a great book too by Eric Foner, if anybody's read it. So awesome read.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Greg. So EJ, if you're able to bring Kyle into the conversation. I think Kyle Parrish had a question.
Kyle, are you still here with us?
Yep.
All right.
I see smiling Kyle. Oh, Kyle's coming live and direct from Paris, France.
And Kyle, you're still on mute. So if you'll go ahead and unmute for us.
You're on mute. You're still muted, Kyle.
Sorry about that. It's Vegas.
Nope.
Vegas.
Oh, he's in Vegas. He's at the Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
He's at the Pro Bowl or the NHL.
So hey, thanks for first of all doing this. I actually live in the town of Cary, and a friend of mine, Emmanuel Wilder, invited me to this, and it's fantastic. And I'm actually running, and this is not about me, but I'm running for Congress in North Carolina's 7th district, and my whole thing is about how to build bridges. So to hear you guys talking, the education over condemnation is something that just totally struck me, because what I'm trying to do is be an ally for groups while also building bridges to people who do have the barriers up that you were talking about, Greg, in your conversations, where they feel like they're having something taken away from them or they're threatened or whatever. And so how can I be a better ally at work, in life, and out on the campaign trail to represent kind of where you guys are coming from as a white male, right? Because I would love to know how I can do better. And I think maybe y'all would have some ideas.
I think, Dave, well, first of all, Kyle, thank you for your question. It's a wonderful question. And I think you're, by taking this, this first step, being on this call, is a good example of how and what you can do. Because Kyle, what I share often when people ask me that question is it's not important for you to understand all of it, but it's important that you want to. And I hope that makes sense, right? It's important that you are curious enough to let down your guard. You're curious enough to put yourselves in situations where you might be uncomfortable or you might be in the minority. But you're there to try to understand, and you're approaching it with a sense of, as I said earlier, a sense of compassion and understanding and openness and trying to build that bridge. And so the actions that we need to take are often not that difficult. We just need to have different sensibilities about what truth is and isn't. And this notion of wanting to understand and approaching situations with more empathy and trying to find common ground, that shared mutuality that Dr. King used to always talk about. We're connected by this web of a mutual destination tied to a shared mutuality. Like, that's what's important for you, Kyle, and your constituents to want to understand. We're all in this together, and our destinies are all tied together. And so how can you, as a conduit for all of that, just be someone who sees yourself in this work, as we're talking about Black History Month, which again is controversial for me, but that you see yourself in that you see yourself in this notion of Black history and why it's actually your history too.
Thank you for that, Greg. I think that's really powerful, is recognizing that it is a shared history, and that we should look at it through that lens. Thank you for that. So next up, I think Mr. Steve Rao, Council Member Steve Rao. Steve, thank you for joining. Do you have a question? I think you're muted, Steve.
There you go. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Greg. Thank you for being with us. My question is, and I'm wearing my Future of Black History shirt that I got
Nice. Nice.
Before COVID. And I'm virtual from City Hall, but from my desk actually. But I wanted to, you said a quote that really triggered a question, and it said the truth and reconciliation are sequential. And first of all, I serve in the North Carolina League of Municipalities Race and Equity Task Force, and I'm also a political analyst on a couple of news stations. And sometimes, as I'm talking with my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, there are individuals who just say, well, race, we've got to move beyond race, and we need to not have a chip on our shoulder, and we need to just, we're all at the same level playing field. And like the governor of Virginia is saying, we should judge each other by the content of our character, not by the color of their skin, and not realizing that they're trying to do what you said, reconcile before they can face the truth. And yes. I'm in the tech industry. There's a lot of data today that, before I ask my question, 45 million Black Americans only own homes compared to 75 million white Americans. That's a fact. 13% of Black men are incarcerated in prisons. As the son of immigrants from India, I will tell you, and I just want to get your perspective of how we begin that process of getting to the truth and sharing it in a respectful manner. But as a son of immigrants from India, I can tell you, after working with Pettigrew and working with other Black leaders around the state, my perspective on racism has changed, because I often even tell myself that even though I have experienced racism in my lifetime, I can never put myself in the same situation as a Black man, because my ancestors didn't come to this country on slave ships in chains. And when my
Correct.
mother and father came, they just came, went right in. Yeah, they experienced racism. My dad was a surgeon, but they worked through it. But there's just so much bad history that we just almost are embarrassed of, that we want to ignore. And I think if we don't get to the truth first, so how do
Correct.
we begin that
Yeah.
process? That's my question. How do we begin that
Okay.
process?
Thank you,
Thank
you.
Steve. Thank you,
Sorry to
Steve.
be so long in my question time.
No, it was good, and it was powerful, and you know, it made me think about. And there's so many answers that run through my head, Steve. But I'll say just a couple of things really quickly. You know, one is that another really I think powerful quote from Douglas for me is he talked about no people can have either mental or moral excellence without having wealth and being able to participate fully in the economy and share wealth. And so this notion of poverty and how poverty was institutionalized intentionally against the Black community to keep Black people from advancing economically and therefore socially in this country. And it's always interesting to me to sort of think about when we talk about welfare and how welfare has been something that has been a critical tool in this country that has primarily benefited white communities. The largest welfare package ever done in this country, there were two of them. One was the Homestead Act in 1862 from Abraham Lincoln. 270 million acres of land were given to white families in this country. That's how we advanced west in this country. And all they had to pay was a small registration fee. The second one was the New Deal under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The New Deal created the whole Federal Housing Association, the GI Bill after World War II. That's how the middle class in this country was created. The middle class in this country was created because of an influx of resources and dollars that provided mortgages to families so that they can build homes after the Great Depression. We were in the middle of a depression. Something had to be done to create a middle class. So we created all these government institutions, and these loans were government-backed loans. So the banks were willing to take more risk because the mortgages were backed by the federal government. That's a welfare program.
Right. Right.
That's a welfare program.
That's the
funded.
accuracy, right, Greg? That's the accuracy piece of it.
Yes.
You talk about.
That's
Yeah.
how the middle class was created. And we don't have enough time for me to go into how, you know, Blacks were kept out of that, redlining and all of that. We were kept out of that. But that's how we built the foundation of this country. The whole capitalist system is built on the backs of slavery. The whole capitalist system. That's how America became the dominant economic power around the world, is because they had free labor. There were 3.2 million slaves who helped pick cotton, and cotton became the number one export. That's how the capitalist system, James Madison said that. I'm not making this up. James Madison said that. That's the foundation of capitalism was slavery. And so, Steve, like, we have to be able to have those conversations, again, not as a way of sort of shaming and blaming, but understanding how we move forward. And I would encourage everybody, if you haven't read it, to read the Kerner Commission report from the late 60s, that because all of it is still true, you know, and the headline from the Kerner Commission that everybody remembers is we're moving towards two societies, separate and unequal, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Well, we're still in those days. And if you read the Kerner Commission report and the issues that they were wrestling with back then, we have the same issues today. Yeah. It's because we failed to do what both, Steve, your question and what we're talking about is to come into terms with the truth and what are the fundamental and foundational issues. A lot of them are rooted in the economics, as I said before. Racial equality and economic equality are inseparable twins. We have to deal with both.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting when you talk about kind of the welfare system and understanding why we find ourselves in the current climate that we're in, or the the societal conditions that we're in, right? And it's important to understand why and have that accuracy of history. It's not that one people group is just kind of a biologically lazier or more prone to crime or more prone to violence, right? That's not the case. But if we talk about something like reparations, right, which is a form of welfare, I think it was Andrew Johnson who dismissed the 40 acres and a mule reparations policy that Lincoln had put into place. That never, he said, no, we're not going to do that. But reparations were given to slave owners for lost property. They were handsomely compensated for their lost property, but there were no reparations given to the actual slaves who were now, emancipated, but with absolutely nothing, to build a life from.
Operation 15 is the
Right.
name of that. Operation
So
15.
there's some historic context.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot. I don't know what we're doing, how we're doing for time. I could either respond or just wait for the next question, because there's a lot I could say about that. But
Well, let's go to the. I don't want to.
yeah,
selfish
yeah,
and
we'll be here all
allow
day, man.
Yeah.
You poking the bear. Right?
So I think Jennifer was next. EJ, if you could bring Jennifer on the screen.
Hey.
Hey, Jennifer, great. You got to give me a
How
chance
are
to say
you
hello to my friend who I haven't seen in ages. Hello.
Good morning to you both. Thank you so much for doing this today. This has been great. My question was around how do you maintain your sense of balance and your sense of peace while meeting people where they are? So I would love to know your tips on that, where you can, sometimes it feels like getting sucked into a black hole when somebody's where they are is not close to where you are. And so I struggle with being reactive sometimes. And so I just wondered what your tips are on how you kind of maintain your place, your balance, and your sense of, stay strong in kind of who you are while giving that grace, and trying to help move them forward, like you were saying, like the person in your office.
Yeah, wow. That's a powerful question, Jennifer. I appreciate that. And you used an important word when you said grace. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to read The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav, but that book years ago changed my life, actually. It really helped me sort of come to terms with my purpose, and without getting too deep with it, because it is a pretty deep book. But it's all about, Jennifer, aligning your personality with your soul energy. Like, that's where true empowerment comes from, is when your personality and your behavior are completely connected to the energy of your soul. And at the core of my soul is this understanding of why I'm here, both in the here and now and in the larger context. And that's all about serving other people. It's all about serving things bigger than myself. And so that is always at the core of sort of how I choose to show up, Jennifer. So, aligning my personality with truly the things that bring me joy and hope and optimism. I'm an optimistic person by nature, just because I'm human and I'm alive. And I think people who are pessimists have given up. And I'm just not a person who's wired that way. So anyway, that's the short answer to your question, is aligning personality to your inner soul is a good place to start.
Yeah, thank you for that, Greg. And really being, what I'm gathering from that is being purpose driven, right?
Yes.
And recognizing the gifts that you have, the passions, the desires of your heart, and how can those intersect for you to be able to serve those around you, right? For the greater good. And there's always a way and an opportunity to serve others, right? And that empathy that you talked about earlier doesn't mean you have to be in the same situation or circumstance, but you can now understand why that person thinks the way that they do, why they feel the way that they do, and leverage your resources to be able to help elevate their life in whatever way you can. You don't have to have had the same lived experience. But if you take time to listen to them to understand why they are frustrated, why they are angry, then you can leverage whatever it is you have to help do something to change those circumstances. Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Jennifer, and thank you for that response, Greg.
And just a 10-second add on to that, True, is most people, in those situations are operating from a place of fear, and once you sort of understand that, and we all do, when we have times of anger and frustration, it's usually driven by some fear, whether it's fear of failure, whether it's fear of people exposing us as an imposter, whatever it is, fear is a really, really powerful emotion that I try not to let into my psyche.
No, that's really important to remember, right? Above all things, guard your heart. So, Leah, are you up next? And I think this may be our final question, Greg. I think Leah's going to be our final question before we wrap up.
Awesome.
Hello, thank you guys. This is so wonderful. My question was kind of about, especially kind of in some DEI spaces, what are your thoughts, Greg, on reconciling the burden of responsibility of truth, whether it be us as, the marginalized community, or whether it be, the non-marginalized community, right? So when we're in our spaces, whether it be, corporately, because you have those people who are like, well, it's not my responsibility to, teach these people about this or that, or, how do you find that balance, and kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Great question, Leah. Thank you. I always start, Leah, as what is our shared objective? And this goes back to sort of where I started. Our mission at US Bank, our purpose statement says we power human potential. The cool part about that, and the cool part about my job, is I've never had more job clarity in my entire life than I have right now. Because my job is very simple. My job is to make sure that statement is true for every single one of our stakeholders. That's it. We power human potential. What's implied at the end of that sentence is for everybody. But we know through the work of DEI, and the data will tell us that that's actually not happening. And so that is the work to do. And so the mission for me and the mission for my team is super clear. And it actually is tied to all of these conversations that we've been having and all the questions that have come. If we simply said, as a country, we want to live up to our promise as a country to the principles of democracy, and we want to make that true, then you now understand what the work to be done is. And it's all this stuff that we've been talking about today, the truth. And so in a corporate setting, that means, how are we building business strategies? What are our hiring practices? What are our leadership development practices? Where do we have barriers within the system that are preventing us from meeting our goals? And when we recognize them, we need to remove and eliminate them. I've talked a lot publicly about a work that we're doing, so I won't make this a US Bank commercial. You can check all of that out online, or check me out on Twitter at Cunningham1. Sorry, True, I had to put the little commercial in, but
go ahead, plug, bro, plug.
I gotta get my numbers up. No, I'm kidding. But all that stuff, Leah, is out there, and so I won't make this about the US Bank. But from a corporate perspective, I always believe when you put the business objective first, the talent strategy becomes really obvious. Steve pointed out some really important statistics around home ownership and white families. 75% of white families, white households own their own home. That number is 45% for Black households. Well, we're a bank. We actually lend money for mortgages. And so for us, if we start with how do we close that gap, it becomes apparent that we're going to need more Black loan officers. We may need more Black appraisers. So when we start with, Leah, what the business objective is, what's the problem we're trying to solve, the DEI component of it becomes quite apparent. And that's where the talent strategy should always support what the business objective is. So that's just a little bit of my thoughts on how I would answer that, but certainly have a lot more I could say about it.
Thank you for your question, Leah, and thank you for that, Greg. And Greg, I want to apologize in advance. but I'm going to steal another minute or two of your time. I know we are at time, but
We can do
we
this
have
as long, we can do it as long as you want.
Thank you, brother. Thank you,
Yeah.
brother. So generous with the gift of your time, and I appreciate that. So I think we do have another question. Leanne, are you on? Are you with us?
I am, and sorry, I was typing it in, and when Emmanuel had me join, my question went away. So I guess for me, and I sit and I ask the how a lot, and it's not necessarily a question that I'm like, hey, can you answer this for me? But I don't know how, and I had it written so beautifully. So let me like, now I'm on camera, I look awful. So I guess I keep asking myself, like, how do we go about making these changes? Like, how do we go about changing the perspective of the people that fear having real, true American history and the full American history in our schools? Like, how do we know our elected officials, especially when it comes to schools, are going to be ones that support this change? Like, how do we get to the point where February doesn't have to be a month where we are learning new facts about Black history, but it is a month that we can celebrate? And it's not that, and for me, I was kind of waiting to ask, because it's not, I don't know. It's like I'm asking these hows, but at the same time, I'm like, do you guys know the answers? Like, I don't feel like that's fair to ask.
No.
But
Yeah, like nobody has all the answers.
No.
And obviously February is the shortest month of the year too. So they gave us the shortest month of the year for Black History Month. That's not lost on us either. But but I keep referencing a lot of things that I'm reading, because I've actually made some really good choices on some of the things I've read recently, and this one may surprise you. And I promise, Leanne, it in some ways will answer your question. Will Smith's book is actually, his memoir is one of the best memoirs I've read recently, and that may surprise some people, because I'm not celebrity driven in that way. True, I mean, we've been around enough celebrities throughout our career that that's not something that moves us in that way. But I was really surprised at how many important lessons were in his book. And Leanne, the answer is, he talks about when he was a young boy, his dad made him and his brother build this wall. And every day after school, they'd have to come build this, lay bricks to build this wall. And, his dad was telling him, like, stop focusing on the wall and focus on laying that brick perfectly. And when you think about it that way, and I talk about DEI in this way too, and this goes back to Leela's question a little bit, we're too destination focused. Like, we're all too focused on what is the end state, and we're not focused on what can we do today. Like, just lay a really good brick today. And if you do that every day, you lay a really good brick every day, you're gonna wake up one day and you're gonna have a wall. And to me, like, that's what I'm focused on right now. I'm doing a dry January right now, but I know January's over, but I'm still going. Like, I didn't have a drop of alcohol in January. And that for me, it was like a hard thing, like, to have none. But it was the same thing. It's like, I didn't focus on, like, oh my God, I got to make it to January 30th. It was like every day, it's like I would grab water and I would drink water, even on Friday night, Saturday night. You know what I mean? When you're really, we're all in the pandemic and we're all like, and so I focused on laying a really good brick every day. And it's the same with going to the gym. Every workout doesn't have to be an Olympic workout. As long as I go every day,
Right.
Like, let's go. Even if I just do 15 minutes one day, just lay a good brick every day. And at the end of it, you're going to have a wall, Leanne. So.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful, Greg. I mean, doing the little things consistently over time,
Yes,
right, is what will ultimately lead to something great. You look up one day and wow, there's that wall.
Yeah.
No, very, very powerful. Greg, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that joined us this morning. Thank you to the town of Cary for being such great partners and allowing us to put this program on every year. Already looking forward to next year's. Greg, you've given me so much to think about, so much to chew on, as you always do. So brother, I can't thank you enough. Thank you again for sharing the gift of your time with us, man. You're always so willing to share. And that's one of the things that I really respect and admire about you. You have so much and you don't hold tight on to it, trying to just make sure that you get yours. You want everyone, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, orientation, you want everyone to win.
Yes.
Man,
Yeah.
we need more like you, brother.
Thank you, man. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. And so please follow Greg. And in all seriousness, what's your IG again? Please, like, follow him. You all will get some major keys. What's your IG again?
IG is Greg Cunningham 1, number 1, and Twitter is G Cunningham 1, the number 1.
Okay. Follow this man. Thank you all again. And remember, as Greg talked about, truth and reconciliation are sequential. So as we're looking to do this work together to build the most inclusive and equitable communities, environments, organizations, workspaces, and nation that we can possibly build, let's allow everyone access to accurate information. Let's allow everyone the opportunity to be their authentic selves. And then let's make sure we're taking the necessary action steps to affect the change that we seek. Thank you all again. Appreciate you being here. And I look forward to seeing all of these same smiling faces right here next year. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.